We're fast approaching the age of the superhuman, and we're doing this by transcending the bounds of evolution. So buckle up and prepare to enter the world of the Iron Man Executive with Dr. Daniel Stickler. We'll explore the limitless human potential through cutting-edge science, new technologies, and medical advancement. Here is your host, Dr. Daniel Stickler.
Welcome back to this edition of the Iron Man Executive. I'm Dr. Dan, and as usual, we have another really exciting and educational show coming up for you. I do want to reiterate a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about all the exciting things that have been happening at the Apeiron Center for Human Potential, where we have recently launched the Apeiron Academy. That's APEIRON.academy, not a .com, but .academy. You can go there. Check out all the new courses that we're teaching now in epigenetics. We're actually having a certification in epigenetic coaching. This is about 120 hours of training, and most of that is done by me. I also have some really amazing coaches that are going to be teaching this with me, coaches that are tops in their field in the realm of coaching, tops in their field in the realm of business development for health coaches, health and wellness. So if you are an existing health and wellness coach, a physician, a chiropractor, a nutritional therapist, a dietitian, or somebody who just wants to get into health coaching because you have a huge passion for it, go on and check this out because this will take you to a whole new level. Epigenetic coaching is the new paradigm of medicine, and after you hear the intro on that website, you will be convinced. Plus, we have a lot of fun in creating this tribe, so be sure to check it out. Now, you heard me talk last week about essentially an affiliate partnership that we have developed with Neurohacker Collective. This is a company that manufactures the Neurohacker Qualia brain supplementation, and I tell you, the stuff is really out of this world. I mean, it truly does exactly what you expect it to do, and it really is just taking the brain to a whole new level of optimization. We found this after I had referred several patients to it to try it out because it really had a mix of nutrients that I said, this is really the real deal. And so it led down the road to several conversations with the company, and eventually I had some conversations with Daniel Schmachtenberger, who is one of the founders. And the guy is absolutely fascinating. So I asked him to come on the podcast and to talk about the whole Neurohacker Collective and a little bit about the Qualia product. And he agreed to do so. This is an interview that is really out of this world. I mean, Daniel, I don't even venture to give a good intro to Daniel because anything I try to do as far as a bio will really not do justice to who Daniel Schmachtenberger is. So what I did is I asked him to kind of tell us about himself and about the company and their mission in the intro to this interview. And I can tell you, he is someone who takes an entire systems approach to absolutely everything. In our medical practice, we use a systems approach to health and wellness, and it's this whole interaction of all these systems involved. Well, he takes that to a whole new level of not only health and wellness, but to business, to commerce, to life in general. And you're going to be blown away by this interview. So sit back and have a listen. All right, so I've got a great guest with us today. His name is Daniel Schmachtenberger, and he has agreed to come on and talk to us about various topics, but most importantly, we want to focus on the company that is part of his vision and some of the products that they have. But let's start off, Daniel, talking about who you are. Just give us some background and a little bit about what makes you you.
Very open question. So I think a meaningful place to start is I was fortunate to be home educated as a kid in a way that was kind of an educational experiment that my parents wanted to run, which was what happens if you give a kid no curriculum at all, expose them to everything you can, see what they're interested in, and facilitate the interests. So I didn't have a fixed amount of social studies and English and et cetera. And what was really interesting about that, of course, it means that there are certain things that are part of normal general education that I wasn't interested in and just didn't get. So my handwriting is illegible, my spelling is bad, but I dove very deeply into all the sciences early on, and I didn't even think of them as separate divisions, because the division between biology and chemistry and physics are useful for us for trying to create curriculum, but obviously universe is radically integrated and you have causal arrows pointing in up and down directions. And so studying it that way, it was just the study of how universe works. And so all the areas of science, all of the philosophic disciplines that created context for maybe why is science that way? Why is the nature of reality the way that it is? And then all the different areas of activism. How can we understand the nature of reality better so we can participate in alleviating suffering, making a higher quality of life experience possible for everyone? And so that braid of activism, science, and philosophy is kind of core to who I am, and all of the various endeavors fit within it.
Yeah, and that's why I wanted to bring that up, because looking at your background, I mean, you have a very diverse kind of entrepreneurial background and activism background. Can you tell us about some of the projects that came from that?
Yeah. So working in activism early on, this was everything from ecological work to civil rights work to animal rights work. And one of the things that I saw also, having a background in interdisciplinary science, ended up leading, fortunately, to a background in system science, understanding how seemingly different things actually fit together into self-organizing wholes, into whole systems. And so taking a system science approach to activism, I saw, okay, here's an area where we're trying to, say, protect an animal from poaching. And the answer is, say it was an elephant, we're going to put bigger fences around the preserves and create harsher sentencing for poachers. But we're not addressing the underlying poverty of the people that can't meet their needs any other way adequately other than poaching. We're not addressing the value system and why it's conditioned that way towards animals. We're not addressing macroeconomics that leads to poverty. We're not addressed, like, there's so many things that aren't being addressed that if we succeed at getting the fences up, then the poachers move to some other animal somewhere else, or, some other problem. And so starting to look at what would it take to actually meaningfully address all of the things that need addressed from a systems point of view? What would a whole systems design upgrade for humanity look like? So relatively early on, that became my primary inquiry. And so this was, maybe we actually can't change the future of education to be optimal education that brings forth the full potential and capability of humans if we don't change macroeconomics to where we're not having to prepare those kids for a workforce in the way that we are now, but we're preparing them for a different macroeconomic structure where the facilitation of their unique genius capabilities is supported in terms of the system they're coming into, et cetera, right? So started looking at what is the future of macroeconomics, what's the future of governance, what's the future of education, of healthcare, that are optimum, factoring the interconnectivity of all of those things upgrading. So this was the beginning of starting a think tank that then worked with a number of other leading edge think tanks on the topic of fundamental restructure of civilization in ways that could prevent current problems that really must be prevented, catastrophic and existential risks that otherwise have too high of a probability currently, that could address the underlying causes of so much of the unnecessary human-induced suffering, and that could produce highest quality of life for highest potential of quality of life for all life. And so then it's just really been a refinement of this process of what really needs to happen and how do we go about doing that. And for a while, I worked with large NGOs and companies and trying to implement some of the ideas through those vehicles, until realizing that those vehicles really couldn't do the things that were necessary. The groups that were working on hunger were quite happy to address starvation in areas of extreme poverty by bringing industrial agriculture to the area to be able to create more food production there, even if that meant more nitrogen runoff leading to faster dead zones in the ocean, because those weren't the metrics they were tasked with. And it doesn't mean they were really happy. It just means that the nature of, here's the metrics you're tasked with, and they are interconnected with other things, but that's not the focus of how that interconnectivity is addressed is just outside of the macro systems that those structures are part of. And so eventually said, all right, well, let's just actually look at how to build things from scratch that can obsolete the things that need obsoleted.
Well, and that's, there's a reason behind why I wanted you to go into that story. We've talked previously and I know the story and I've read some background on it, but it's also one of the approaches we use in our new paradigm of medicine, of human potential medicine, where we look at this entire biospherical approach. So we look at the interactions of all aspects of the human being, including environmental interactions and sleep, stress, thoughts, brain function, all of that. So you've taken this into just this amazing think tank process. And here's what I'm leading to is the creation of Neurohacker Collective. That Neurohacker Collective actually came from this think tank. And I think that's just fascinating, the way that the organization, I think a lot of people will look at Neurohacker and they'll see the Qualia product and they'll think, oh, they're a supplement company. But that's far from even close to what Neurohacker Collective is.
Two things. One is, you said the approach that we were describing for civilization design and the approach that you advocate for medicine are very related. They are very related because the human body and the human mind-body environment system is a complex system. And so if you try and do, reductionist parts-based approach, it works for acute things. It doesn't work for complex things. And so, all right, there is too much LDL, so we're going to give a statin, but we didn't really ask why there's too much LDL and what the externalities, side effects of the statin are going to be. And, that approach just doesn't work for complex illness, and it doesn't work for comprehensive wellness optimization. So you have to say, across all of the different body systems, are there ways that the gut affects the brain? Yes, through the enteric nervous system, through the microbiota, through, so the division between neurology and gastroenterology, you can't maintain specialism across those boundaries. You can't maintain specialism across the genetic bottom-up organization and the connectomic top-down organization, because they're inter-influencing each other in real time. And so you look at the body as a whole, complex adaptive system, regulatory system, and then you say, our goal is to increase the resilience of the entire system, the homeostatic capacity of the whole system. How do we go about doing that? And to see disease as where some deviations from homeostasis exceeded the homeostatic capacity of the system, leading to pathophysiology, and how do we then bring that back and, restore system resilience? When we're looking at an ecosystem, or we're looking at human civilization systems, they're also complex adaptive systems where the goal, similarly, the economics and the environment are interaffecting each other inexorably, right? All the social systems, governance, law, are interaffecting infrastructure. And so you have to say, well, again, what would a really resilient system look like? And it's not going to look like exponential growth of a materials economy on a finite planet. There's just no way that could ever be resilient, right? It's not going to look like for-profit military industrial complex while trying to create peace, or for-profit sick care while trying to create health. It's not going to look like places where the incentives are misaligned with the goals. And so you say, well, what would a really resilient system look like? And so why humanitarian aid? Why all of our approaches to peace and security and global problem solving haven't been working is the exact same reason allopathic medicine doesn't work for complex issues. We very much have an allopathic system of governance that is dealing with symptoms rather than causes, dealing with things as separate issues that really are interconnected issues. So, we apply the same systems for looking at medicine and the body because they are complex systems optimization. Now, why we started focusing on bringing forward solutions for future of well-being science, which would include what we've called medicine in the past, how to move from disease states to wellness states, but also how to maintain and optimize and continuously evolve states of higher and higher well-being, higher and higher system resilience. And we're starting not in the medicine space, but in the optimization space with Neurohacker Collective, and specifically in the mind-brain space. How do we optimize the mind-brain interface for optimally sovereign humans whose agency, whose intelligence, whose sentience are all, evolving and interconnectedly evolving? The reason why that is one of the critical things that has to happen for all of the meaningful shifts that have to happen on a planet-wide level is that when we look at all of the problems that we want to change, whether we're talking about violence, at a crime level, or violence at a war level, or violence against nature at a biodiversity loss level, or like all of those issues that we're trying to address are caused by human behavior. And all of the solutions we want to bring about have to come from human behavior. So then the question becomes, what are all the things that influence human behavior and that can influence it in destructive or constructive directions? And obviously economics influences human behavior. If you create an economic system where war is profitable, or an economic system where a whale is worth $1 million dead on a fishing boat but is worth nothing alive, that economic system predisposes destructive behavior. So you need to change economics to incentivize for any agent that which is also positive for all other agents in the commons. That is a radically different system in macroeconomics. So economics and social systems as a whole influence behavior. Environment influences behavior. Our psychology and our definition of success and self influence behavior. So does our physiology. And everyone who has ever felt shitty when they were sick, or had a hangover, or hormones or neurotransmitters were out of balance, or just had a headache, knows that there are certain states of consciousness that are just inaccessible when your physiology is off, and other ones that are almost unavoidable that affect your experience and your behavior. And the same is true when your system is more in tune. And so realizing that empathy runs on certain neural networks in the brain, that consciousness is running on the hardware of physiology. And if the hardware of physiology is damaged or just downregulated or out of tune, that there are whole aspects of experience and behavior that are just either downregulated or not possible. And the question of how do we optimize physiology for optimal human experience and behavior, right? People who have complex problem solving, have high emotional resilience, have high, agency, et cetera, so that they have the predispositions and capability to really be assets to the balance sheet of nature rather than liability.
Yeah. And, this whole complex interactive aspect, I mean, you focused in on allopathic medicine, but I see it in functional medicine as well. I mean, I think the whole system has come down to treating the human being as a disease state. There isn't this option for optimization in the medical communities right now. And, that's our driving force, is to create that option for people who say, you know what, we're not really broken, and how can we optimize this system to take us to a new level of existence, a new level of functioning, not in a hedonistic way, but in a kind of eudaimonic way, to bring the whole population into this new realm. Josh Middledorf, a friend of mine, who I interviewed on this show, he wrote the book Cracking the Aging Code, and he compared the current medical paradigm to, hearing the call of a man overboard, and you run and you see a guy thrashing in the water, and you're throwing life preservers to him, and he's not reaching for them. And you can keep throwing them, but he's never going to reach for them because it's a system that's broken, that you can't fix, no matter how hard you try. So I think, there is a role for that disease model aspect, but, with the advances we have, I mean, this is something that we need this new approach to. And, you've ventured into this realm with the Neurohacker Collective, the qualia product that you have created with that is just an amazing product to optimize human function.
Yeah, so we talk about the future of well-being science more than we talk about the future of medicine, because medicine is the system of how do we deal with illness. And of course, once illness is there, our well-being science system already failed. Our goal is to maintain and optimize and evolve well-being. And then, of course, there will be times where something happens, right? There's some deviation from homeostasis that's beyond the system's capacity. And so we come in to help help resolve it. But the goal is recognizing that it's actually the system's own self-organization that is what makes the person better. It's just now, what things do we help supply the system with so it can do that? So coming to jumping forward, and if it's interesting to get into how we define health and well-being, how we define illness, how we define aging. We can do that in pretty formal ways that are useful. So we can come back to that.
Okay.
The goal of Qualia specifically it's the first product that we brought to the market as a kind of well-being enhancement support, and specifically well-being enhancement in the direction of increasing quality of subjective experience and certain aspects of performance capability that are aligned with what people would traditionally think of associated with cognitive enhancement, but take it a step up. We think of what we call sovereignty enhancement. We define sovereignty in a bigger way than I think most people are used to thinking of it. We define sovereignty as the product of three orthonormal vectors, XYZ axis. So one of them is intelligence, one is sentience, one is agency. So intelligence is one's ability to process all kinds of information. So critical thinking and systemic thinking and total body of knowledge and memory focus, information, speed of processing is all things associated with intelligence. Sentience is one's depth and subtlety and robustness of feeling, right, of sensing, of experiencing. So empathy and mindfulness and awareness of self and other, all those things live in sentience. And then agency is one's ability to maintain their integrity as an individual and then act in the universe and act in the universe functionally. So will, drive, responsibility, follow through, all those things. So if you think of those three as XYZ axes and you think of kind of whichever the shortest one is defines volume of a sphere, we're trying to grow that sphere. And so when you think of the fact that, and very well, someone's certain hormones being out of balance, certain neurotransmitters, certain cell energy dynamics being out of balance can absolutely affect people's will and drive, can affect their empathy, their proprioception, their mindfulness, can affect their cognition, various aspects of it. So addressing the physiology of it is not sufficient. We also have to address the psychology of it and the, what we kind of think of as the human software side. But the human hardware side is necessary. And so then we're saying, what can we do to support the underlying aspects of human physiology that are involved in all of those to optimize and evolve human sovereignty? So Qualia is the first thing we brought to market to support those processes. And, it was several years of R&D where we were doing personalized versions of that in clinical settings, I'm sure similar to how you do, and then realizing that when we were looking at complex, blood chemistry, genomes, et cetera, there were some things that were very different from one person to the next, and how to bring that kind of personalized well-being science to masses is in our goal set. But there were many things that were common across most people that were key to systems optimization, and those were the early products we were able to start developing.
Well, the thing that really impressed me about this, we do epigenetics and we do nutrigenomics in our practice, and this is basically a bottle full of nutrigenomic modifiers. I had looked into developing a powder that included some of this stuff, but what excited me was when I'm reading through this, you had taken what was the concept in my mind and taken it to just a whole new level with what you put in this stuff. And it was not only a combination of product, but the actual dosages, which you rarely see in supplements at dosage levels that are equivalent to what the research is actually showing. When I saw acetyl L-carnitine at 800 milligrams, algyl DHA at 200 milligrams, even Bacopa moneri, which is one of my favorite supplements, at 300 milligrams, benfotiamine, mucuna to help boost dopamine in the brain. All of these things were just really impressive for me to see that, even adding the uridine to the supplement in order to help with the choline utilization, boost choline. You just don't see that in supplements. And it was exciting to see this. And when I started recommending it to my clients, and I hadn't even taken it yet, they were reporting back to me how outstanding they felt on this stuff. I have to say there's one thing, though, that I would love to see in it, and it's holy basil, which if I could say there was one thing that would make this thing just perfect, it would be holy basil.
The process of how we developed it was actually really fun. I think you'll appreciate. So we started from a kind of cognitive science point of view of saying, all right, so what are all of these subjective states and capabilities, cognitive and other neurologically related capabilities that we're wanting to affect for people here, and that people are wanting when they go to, say, energy drinks or off-label smart drugs or whatever. And so we model that out. It has to do with short-term memory and speed of memory and long-term memory and verbal fluency and digit span and arithmetic processing and analytic thinking and synthetic thinking and creativity and focus and attention span, all of those cognitive metrics, and things like drive and emotional resilience with increased presence and subjective flow state. And so it's very important to get that right first, because if you have just a subset of it and you're seeking to optimize a subset of that, it'll usually be at the cost of some of the other important metrics. So this is what's so commonly reported when someone is using a smart drug like Adderall for off-label purposes. They'll increase a part of their dopamine pathway without the rest of the aspects of their dopamine pathway or any of the other neurotransmitter or other, kind of key neurologic pathways, such that they do have increased, say, focus, but maybe at the cost of other important cognitive metrics like aspects of memory and processing, and definitely at the cost of, say, the ability for task switching, which can lead to more aggravation, irritability, anxiety. And then, of course, you also have the ability to, if you use a exogenous override of an endogenous regulatory system, then you're going to decrease the regulatory capacity of that system, i.e., dependence, downregulation, and addiction. And so our goal was, how do we work through the endogenous pathways such that if someone used this for some period of time and then stopped, rather than be downregulated and addicted, they would actually have their baseline elevated. And so we're really supporting, endogenous regulatory capacity. So we started with modeling, all right, here's all the things we're wanting to affect subjectively, performatively. Then we went through all the literature of all the various sciences that we could and said, what do we know across all the sciences of which aspects of physiology mediate and relate to those aspects of psychology? And so, if we're talking about memory, there's a lot that we know about acetylcholine, about glutamate, about catecholamines, about specific receptor sites, about specific kinds of synaptic processes. So we started modeling all of that out to develop the whole interconnected set of underlying physiology that we'd want to be upregulating, and then the whole regulatory pathways associated to say, we're wanting to upregulate these biosystems, right? And obviously that's going to get all the way to the whole system, but in a weighted fashion. And then we looked at what chemistries map to being able to support those systems. And we got a list of 500 or so chemicals that we had a lot of data on. And then we started looking at which ones are safe across the other systems, have good safety data, which ones have synergistic effects across multiple systems. And then we pared it down to that particular 42 ingredients and those specific doses. And the doses for some things seem high compared to other supplements. Sometimes they seem lower than someone would want, but it's on purpose, because say you're looking at the mucuna for the L-DOPA. Well, we've got DLPA, so you've got the phenylalanine, which will be converting into tyrosine, and then acetyltyrosine, and then L-DOPA, and then dopamine. So if you look at the fact that we've got the phenylalanine and acetyltyrosine and L-DOPA, and the P5P that's part of the conversion process, and some of the other minerals and vitamins are part of the conversion process, and then things that are going to support synaptic transporter proteins, endogenous MAO-B inhibitors, things that will sensitize D1, D2 receptors. You can't use the same dose of each of those things that were effective in isolation when you start having synergies across the whole pathway. So we started really looking at how do we have, the effective doses for optimizing flow through pathways, and then interaction between pathways like dopamine with the rest of catecholamines, with acetylcholine and glutamate, with the underlying cell energy processes, and then deeper things like neurogenesis and synaptogenesis. With regard to holy basil is a beautiful herb, obviously adaptogenically, especially for ubiquitous adrenal stress. You'll notice that we have the phosphatidylserine, which has many of the similar effects in terms of HPA, adaptogenic effects on serotonin, ACTH, etc. We actually found enough people that did not respond well to holy basil, that it didn't make it in, that were the kinds of people that were looking for the effects primarily that we'd have here, that it didn't make it in this final cut, but it was definitely used in many of the versions, and we will have products coming out that will include it.
Yeah, one of the aspect I like about holy basil is that the neuroplasticity and the BDNF increases that you get with the holy basil, and that's been my finding with it in clinical practice as well. I mean, it's anecdotal, but the cool thing about it is it raises it causes increased expression of FNDC5 in the muscle, which goes to the liver and gets converted to irisin, which goes to the brain and boosts BDNF, which is the main purpose that we typically focus in on with the holy basil. But I love this whole approach that you have with looking at enhancing existing systems without supplanting the system. And I think that's where a lot of medicine has gone awry, is that in medicine, we focus, and even in wellness in general, I mean, we focus on trying to supplant. The body's a beautiful system. The body is an amazingly complex system that for us to even have the concept that we can micromanage it is just mind-blowing. And so even with like all these antioxidants that people take, I mean, come on, we're producing 1 times 10 to the 24th free radicals a day, and you think that taking vitamin C in these high doses is going to make that big of a difference in that system is just ludicrous. I mean, you look at it and you say, well, it's not that the system's broken. It's not that free radicals are bad. I mean, we produce free radicals for a good reason. So what we need to do is boost the body's management capabilities of that. So boost the system that actually handles it. Give it that little kick to say, hey, I'm going to keep you in a healthy state so that you can do this rather than me trying to micromanage it. And I love the way you've done that with this product.
Yeah. So there, if you say, can giving glutathione have benefit for people? Totally. Does boosting endogenous glutathione production have more benefit? Obviously. Then is there an excessive need on glutathione as a whole because of, some increased toxic exposure or something that we could address or chronic subclinical pathogens that we can do things to help? Of course. So it is a very deep and nuanced thing. I think the thing that I like, I really love hearing you say is the respect and reverence for the intelligence of the body and nature and universe, rather than it's a dumb system and so we have to fix it. When you mention 10 to the 24th free radicals per day, and what do we really think it means to manage that? When we think about 1 trillion metabolic functions per second per cell, give or take, right? And the synchrony of all those. Right. There is just radical parallel processing happening. Every cell having its own internal processing dynamics that then are interacting, and not just every cell, but every organelle, all the way down to, the fundamental physics of it. And so there is no way to top-down manage that. In fact, we can mathematically prove it, right? We can prove that it is a NP complete issue that is non-computable. So then we say, well, how do we support those endogenous regulatory systems? And that is a very different approach to well-being science.
You're listening to the Iron Man Executive with Dr. Daniel Stickler. Be sure to check out the IronManExecutive.com website for free offers, bonus materials, and extended interviews. Now, back to the Iron Man Executive Show.
Well, I want to shift gears a little bit because I wanted to get to this during this interview, but talking about most of my listeners are major biohackers. They're all about, trying different things, the N=1 approach. And I don't actually prefer that term biohacking. I prefer optimizing human potential in that regard. Biohacking just seems almost in that hedonic realm. But you guys use the term neurohacking, and where do you see this neurohacking going? I mean, what's the future process of neurohacking that you see?
So just 2 quick little philosophic things. You mentioned a couple times that the goal of the future of medicine is not purely hedonic, or the future of optimization. That old split between hedon and daemon is actually one of the nonsense things dichotomies we have to reconcile. So when we talked about optimizing human experience and human capability, having a underlying philosophic model that shows that the way that people contribute to the whole is actually optimal for their own quality of life experience and as their quality of life goes up, it increases their capacity and predisposition to contribute to the whole, very much in the same way that a cell relates to the whole body, right? The way that human relates to humanity and to universe. And so we would not throw out hedonism, we would include and transcend it, right? And I think when you said eudaimonia, that's a good word for include and transcend, that people's own experience, their experiential tone being optimized is absolutely useful for then optimizing their capability and predisposition for serving meaningfully, and vice versa. Without deep, meaningful service, there are qualities of personal subjective experience that just don't happen. And so I just wanted to mention that real quick.
The interview I did just 2 weeks ago with Steve Cole, who is a psychoneuroimmunologist at UCLA, he did a study on hedonism versus eudaimonic well-being, and it blew me away. They went into the study, him and Barbara Friedrichsen went into the study thinking, they're going to see similar outcomes of positive physiological responses. And they found that on the psychological scales, the hedonics and the eudaimonics scored equally well on well-being scores. But then when they looked at the health of the immune system, they started looking deeper into these epigenetic marks and blood biomarkers, and they found this is just amazing. The hedonic well-being group actually scored lower than people that had low well-being to begin with, while the eudaimonic group scored off the chart in the health of their immune system. And yet they appeared the same on psychological tests of well-being.
What that means is that the decreased immunity is going to lead to decreased psychological scores over time, right?
Right.
And so some of the team at Neurohacker wrote a really brilliant paper on this. I think it's going to publish soon. But if one is pursuing states of experience that through processes that create momentary spikes but end up eroding baseline, then of course you can have elevated state on the short term and eroded baseline long term. If you are pursuing states of experience where you actually want to evolve the baseline itself, then it's a totally different approach. And this is the 2 marshmallow experiment, right? We all know this, but it is very meaningful to say it is actually anti-addictive. What it ends up creating the highest quality of life, which you could say would be smart hedonism. If someone wants to really have highest quality of experience that gets higher over time, then it's not about short-term spikes. It's about the evolution of baseline. And the evolution of baseline means what actually builds the integrity of the system enduringly.
I'm kind of confused on that one. Can you explain that one just a little bit more to me?
Somebody goes for the chocolate cake. They feel good in the moment. They feel shitty over time as they eat a lot of chocolate cake because they got a dopamine spike, but they got a dopamine spike in a way that affected the rest of their physiology such that it's going to lead to an imbalance in their dopamine opioid axis and a bunch of other systems. So then, of course, as they feel shittier, then they crave more dopamine spikes because their baseline is lower, right? Their baseline well-being is lower, which then wants to feel better more quickly. And as it wants to feel better quickly, then it's going to go for whether it was the chocolate cake, the cocaine, or the whatever it is that creates a hit. And so we can think of addiction as an eroding base, some process to increase subjective well-being quickly that actually decreases the integrity of the system, that lowers the baseline, that creates more desperation to then feel better, which leads to doing the same process, spike.
I gotcha. Yeah. So you were referring to the short-term aspects of it and how that responds. Yeah, I agree with that.
Someone is even pursuing hedonism intelligently, which says, I actually want to feel good, but I want to feel continuously good and progressively more so over a long period of time. A fundamentally different approach has to be taken.
I still think that's going to come down to, though, like they found, in psychological well-being scores, the people who pursued hedonism on a regular basis, they scored very well on that psychological well-being, just as well as the ones that were, living life with a purpose per se. But, I think that there is some aspects that we're all going to experience that hedonistic approach. But I think if we have that overriding purpose, that vision of where we want things to be, and we're living towards it. One of the examples that Dr. Cole used was, the person who climbs Mount Everest. Sure, you can look at that as potentially a hedonistic aspect, but if they're doing it to show humanity that it can be done, then that's a whole different psychological aspect to their well-being that they're utilizing there. Go ahead.
I think the dichotomy that I'm speaking to that is worth reconciling is there is an old Puritan distinction where pleasure is a bad thing and particular interpretation. And so really we're seeking pleasure in the afterlife or something, right? Sacrifice is a good thing, and purpose and meaning end up not being associated with pleasure. And that distinction is an obsolete one, right? Well, we can say that the highest kinds of the pleasure that are very real, because like you said, you have some psychological scores from people who are pursuing, who are focused on their own state versus focused on some larger things that include their own state. And the key is focused on larger purposes, but that will end up including their state rather than excluding it. And so as people pursue being of use to larger than themselves, that will end up inexorably leading to them feeling better. And as to the degree that people actually feel better, they will have more resources to show up more. So I would like to have people think about advancing their own subjective quality of life and advancing their utility to the whole as being intersymbiotic with each other.
I completely agree with that. I think that that kind of brings it all together there and makes a lot of sense to me. You know, my goal is to get to the point where we can reverse age, and it's not and obviously it does have a hedonistic component to it, but in a sense, it's more about an overriding purpose for me to be helping to create this new paradigm and to advance humanity in that regard, because I see it as possible. And people will look at it and say, you know, it's hedonistic to want to live forever. Well, no, not necessarily. I can see that in what you just used as the example there.
Maybe we'll have an opportunity, a show to discuss approaches to the future of anti-aging sometime.
That would be cool. That is my passion for sure. So going down that road a little bit, and I know we're running a little short on time, but I want to ask you what your vision is to take a look at 10 years down the road. Where do you see medicine and, you know, just life in general? I mean, we're at this exponential growth phase of technology and science, and 10 years is a millennium. What can we achieve in that amount of time?
If we think not just about individual technologies, but we think about technological ecosystems that create synergistic capacities across the ecosystem, I think that's a very meaningful thing to think about for the next 10 years. Because we could just talk about robots that do surgery better and individual diagnostic technologies and individual therapeutic technologies, but it's really that entire system's capability that's interesting, right? I think we will see some radical progress in diagnostic and assessment technologies. That'll be things like the evolution of mass spec for metabolomics and maybe home metabolomics. So the quantified self devices move from relatively small number of metrics to a lot of metrics and a lot of fidelity of information that leads to big data at the level of individuals. I think that'll be a huge thing. I think we'll probably even do some further out stuff like laser interferometry for testing more blood metrics without even pricking the blood. We're already doing nanobiosyn technologies for being able to do advanced PCR-like technology from a single drop of blood. So I think ubiquitous data, biodata about people, and then cognitive and psychological data will lead to our ability to do, of course, assessment across lots of people, but also even big data on a single individual because of frequency of testing and all the things that we get to test that will lead to, early disease indicators, also what we would call, need for support system resilience indicators. But that tremendous amount of data will have to be processed on different kinds of processing platforms. So I think combinatorial AI interpretive platforms are going to be a really key thing to be able to say, all right, so we have inflammatory metrics, we have nutrient metrics, we have, proteomic, transcriptomic, metabolomic, et cetera, all this data. How do we look at each of those biometrics, not just in relationship to a reference range, but in relationship to all the other metrics, and see how those metrics are interaffecting each other and how the causal cascades happen, which things move first in response to behaviors or environmental stimuli that then lead to other things moving that lead to recursive effects. And this is a very unique kind of AI, and it will actually require the evolution of the understanding of the ontology of human physiology, how the regulatory systems interact. So we take kind of a complex adaptive systems and cybernetic view of the human as a complex regulatory system, an adaptive system, and it allows us to then not just be doing machine learning on big data, but actually knowing what to look for complex causal dynamics so that it actually drops that nearly infinite amount of information back into computable sets. And then I think therapeutic technologies will be getting better on the medicine side in terms of, already seeing immuno-oncology. It's like one of the first things coming out of what we'd call traditional medicine, pharmaceutical medicine, that is for something that isn't acute, that is actually great, right? So really happy to see that. I think there will be a lot in terms of therapeutic technologies for infection, many different kinds, mucosal infection, humoral cellular infection, for toxicity and subclinical kind of detox. That's another key thing, is the really understanding subclinical pathology and how to assess it and address it. And then, of course, how to prevent it. Understanding more about genetic expression and how to modulate genetic expression. So there will be therapeutic dynamics at each of those levels. And the key of what we'll be coming to is moving towards personalized medicine, not just at a personalized towards a few SNPs in someone's genome or even combinatorics of the genome, but personalized to all of that data that we have. So we stop thinking about MS as a disease or rheumatoid arthritis as a disease. We stop even thinking about cognitive enhancement as a thing that is optimized a certain way, give them a racetam. Or we start thinking about all of the different pathways that are involved and the causal cascades, the multifactorial causal cascade. So we see someone's MS, there might be thousands of different pathways that can contribute to the deviation from homeostasis that leads to MS, and anyone's MS might be some weighted subset. And when I say MS, I could mean anxiety, Alzheimer's, anything, right? Some weighted subset of those factors that led to that pathophysiology. So then we can know how to do differential diagnosis across the whole underlying causal set, possible causal set, right? The causal phase space, see what specific things are actually going on, and then not be treating a disease cluster, but treating the specific pathways that are going on. And again, where sometimes we are specifically reversing some aspect of pathology, but we're primarily focused on increasing system resilience and homeostatic capacity for the body to be able to do that across all kinds of dynamics. And that looks like increasing efficiency of cellular function, increasing efficiency of mucosal membranes, et cetera.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I would even take it a step further. In 10 years, with what we've got going on right now with CRISPR technology, and, I'm interviewing a lot of the people in the field right now. CRISPR, the nanobots, all of this stuff, I think within 10 years, it absolutely is going to be a bioinformatics field, no doubt about that. But I really do see that we are going to be stepping away from disease models. It's just not going to exist. We're going to take care of cancers. We're going to take care of heart disease before it even comes about. And if it does come about, it'll be something that they can go in, do some editing on the immune system, and create a response that is ideal. We have a tool right now with CRISPR that it's like it's like being given a teleporter and not knowing how it's used or anything like that. We've got a technology that is ahead of our knowledge. And I think once we start to learn how to use this, this technology, you can order CRISPR for your home basement to do lab work in your basement. That's how simple this technology is, but it's going to be amazing what comes out of this. And nanotechnology on top of that, I really see a whole new realm of health. And I think physicians, there's going to be little need for physicians most of the time. You're going to be looking at computer AI bioinformatics systems. You're going to be looking at that can compute much greater amounts of details than the human brain can process as a clinician. So you're going to have them running the show for these things, and I think it's going to be an exciting time.
Yeah. So when we think about exponential technology in medicine, so technology that enables more technology of its kind on exponential curves. So we think of nanotechnology, synthetic biology, CRISPR, genome editing, AI, et cetera. One of the interesting things is, of course, you're getting so much more rate of change, right? So much more change per unit time, and continuously so, that we can't have the same adaptive time periods we've had in the past, and our intuitions from the past are less and less adequate. At the same time, our chance of fucking things up increases exponentially too, because any increased power, and we've seen this with all of the major environmental problems that we see in the world, are the application of humans using technology, and even, so many of them in the biotech, right, that we're dealing with at health issues. Technology as increased power, especially if it's not already a self-organizing system, has the ability to have positive and destructive applications, and mostly destructive, not intentionally, but because we just didn't understand the full causal dynamics that were happening. And so with CRISPR, for instance, the reductionist approach of this single nucleotide polymorphism does this thing, so we're going to remove it, from the genome. Let's say we take ApoE4. But then we're starting to get indication of the role of ApoE4 in parasitic immune function. And it doesn't automatically lead to Alzheimer's. It leads to increased predisposition if environmentally triggered in some way. So it's not that I'm not, fascinated by CRISPR. We spend a lot of time with it. But I think that it is critical that we come to understand complex systems dynamics much, much better than we're even currently close to before we think we understand them well enough to edit the self-organizing code itself. And so as we are working towards that, affecting genetic expression through epigenetic switches and through nutrigenomics is awesome. And genome editing requires us increasing our level of understanding tremendously.
Well, and I think even when we get to the point of the genome editing, you're still going to be having to deal with this whole biospherical system of the body interacting. I mean, it's the expression of 23,000 genes to make over 1 million proteins. There's a lot going on between the code itself and the outcome. And I think that, the epigenetics is not going to be going away. We may get better at it, but it's still going to be a major network of complex interactions that just basically will come down to, living the lifestyle that promotes the most optimal function of the human being.
Yeah. One more thing I'll say about the future of medicine and well-being that we haven't mentioned, but that I think is really critical, and I'm sure you talk with your audience about it often, is if we see before someone would normally be diagnosed with lupus or some kind of rheumatism or whatever, we see certain autoimmune antibodies expressing, we see certain cytokines expressing. Well, we can say, okay, so this inflammatory marker causes this illness, or we see certain hormones out of balance for another illness. Obviously, what that means is that inflammatory marker, that hormone, was part of a causal cascade, but it was not the beginning of the causal cascade, right? Those are messenger molecules. There's something upstream from that. We can go all the way upstream and say, what would the tier 1 deviation from the homeostatic integrity of the system be that leads to that process? And you say, all right, well, health is defined as the homeostatic capacity, not being in homeostasis, but the total homeostatic capacity of the system. And more robust health means more homeostatic resilience, the ability to handle larger stressors, larger deviations from homeostasis without actually leaving homeostatic ranges. Cool. So that's health. Then we say aging is different than disease. Disease is some deviation from homeostasis that exceeded the system's capacity to stay within functional ranges, leading to pathophysiology. Aging is decreased homeostatic resilience of the system. So the system might still be in homeostasis across any particular metric, but it has less resilience, so increased susceptibility to disease. So that distinction ends up being meaningful. But you come all the way up and you say, well, it initially starts with some deviation from homeostasis that exceeded the system's capacity, illness specifically, I mean the system's capacity to respond to. So that initial deviation is always going to be either the way the system is interacting, the way the human here, but we could say this for any biological system. The way the system is interacting with its environment that is not aligned with what its evolutionary code can process, or the overarching behavior of the system that's not aligned with its evolutionary code, or an actual problem of the evolutionary code. Problem of the evolutionary code means genetic predisposition for illness independent of environmental expression. But let's just throw that category off to the side for a minute and take the other two. So interface with the environment means taking in too much of something it shouldn't have, which we call toxicity of various kinds, pathogenicity, etc. Not taking in enough of something, deficiency. Overarching behavior of the system means exercise, posture, sleep, lifestyles, stress, lifestyle things where the system is behaving in ways that, again, are not what its evolutionary code adapted to be able to do well, which leads to some kind of system stress dynamics. So we come up to those tier one causes and we say, all right, well, we want to be able to optimize human wellness. We actually want to make sure we're addressing things at that level, right? The homeostatic resilience of the whole system, and also decreasing the tier one dynamics, since so many of those are the interface with the environment where we have ubiquitous toxicity exposures, whether we're talking about chlorine in the water to deficiency from not enough minerals in the water to not enough minerals or humic and fulvic acids or microbiome in the soil where the food is coming from to VOCs in the paint inside. We have modified our environment post-industrial revolution in a way that is not what our genetic code adapted to process, that is a tier one cause of so much illness. So in an environment that has a lot more nitric oxide in the air and more particulate emissions and higher CO2 and, et cetera, and ubiquitous glyphosate, and can people be optimally healthy in that environment? Well, no, they can do things to support themselves to be healthier than they would be otherwise. But this is where our health and the health of the environment that we're in an osmotic gradient relationship with is interlinked. And this is where optimizing human health and optimizing the health of the entire biosphere and the way we design our built world, the toxicology of it, et cetera, are all key. So this is where I'd say we can't actually talk about the future of medicine or the future of wellness, well-being, independent of the topic of the comprehensive redesign of the way we do being human on this planet and all of the aspects that are intersecting.
I agree. That is very well said. The one area that we may differ in, and I'm not sure what your thought process is on this, but I kind of lean towards the programmed aspect of aging in our genome. We're a small group of philosophical belief systems that our DNA is actually, in a sense, programmed to start to downregulate a lot of the systems that we have, and I think that's going to be a major area of the genome editing once we start to identify these programs that we carry that tell the system, you know what, don't function as well at this, don't do as well in monitoring as you have. I mean, we've got examples in nature of animals that show no signs of senescence whatsoever. So I think it's a combination of the two. I think there's absolutely this environmental and biospherical aspect of the things that we interact with that are going to contribute to this process. But I think that there's also a very strong component of genetically programmed deterioration of the human being.
This is probably true. If we could have dynamics that were more like lobster or jellyfish in this way, that is obviously very meaningful. And I think SENS and RAD and those organizations are definitely doing deep dives in what that could be. I think even before we identify that, there's a lot we can do to deal with the likely effects of it, which is, can we induce increased autophagy of senescent cells? Can we protect cells from senescence? Can we increase development of more stem cells and their differentiation throughout tissues? Yes. So we can do those. Then, of course, if we can deal with the underlying mechanisms that lead to more senescence than is necessary in the first place, obviously that's powerful.
Well, I don't want to keep you all night, and I could certainly do that. This has been a fascinating conversation and really thought-provoking as well. And I'd love to have you back on the show to discuss some other aspects that I would love to get into. I had a whole list of additional questions that I didn't even come close to. So,
well, I love being on the show. I love your approach to health and wellness and, vitality and eudaimonia optimization and what you're sharing with people. And, why we call it Neurohacker Collective is because the goals that we seek to, help bring about here obviously can only happen in a meaningful partnerships and symbiosis with everyone that's working towards similar goals. So I look forward to exploring how we can continue to be aligned and mutually supportive as much as possible in these shared goals.
Awesome. Well, I certainly appreciate your time and look forward to further conversations.
Likewise. Thank you, my friend.
Well, as you can tell, I could have probably gone all day in my conversations with Daniel Schmachtenberger. He is a fascinating individual, and we've had some conversations unrecorded over the past couple of weeks, and we have a couple more planned, but he just really helps me to take my brain to areas that I don't expect, not only from his quality of product, but also from his conversations themselves. He is an individual that is going to change the world, and he fits very well into our vision of the Apeiron Center for Human Potential as far as shifting the whole paradigm of a process. In our situation, it's of the health and wellness process. In his, I can't even put it into a box. He's talking about economies. He's talking about health and wellness. He's talking about commerce. I mean, everything he talks about philosophically is about this systems approach. So very fascinating. Be sure to check out the links in the podcast details where we will have links to the Neurohacker product. Be sure to use the code Limitless and you can get a 10% off when you order the product with the discount code. It's not an inexpensive product, but I can tell you the quality of what you get and the ingredients that went in there, you cannot break it down and buy those individual ingredients at those dosages for a lesser price. So it's a good product. It's a excellent mix of nootropics that are designed to enhance the system, not to supplant the system. So be sure to check it out, and also be sure to check out the Apeiron.academy to see about all of the coaching classes that we talked about at the beginning. And I look forward to speaking with you guys next week. Until then, everyone, be epic.
Thank you for tuning in to the Iron Man Executive. Join us each week as Dr. Stickler explores the world of human potential optimization and unlocks the limitless boundaries of human physiology. Be sure to check out the IronManExecutive.com website for bonus material and news of upcoming events. Until next week, may your potential be limitless and your life epic.